Hello everyone, this is part 19 of What If Naruto Had a Proper Teacher, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Every shinobi the Raikage brought with him knew their role in the upcoming battle. The Raikage had created a Raiten clone and stationed him next to Archoi at the head of their army. He was actually positioned on the left side of the army several ranks behind the first wave of shinobi. Darui had not wanted a strong sensor to be able to detect a second Raikage's signature. The Kumo line moved forward and started the attack by launching kunai with explosive tags attached at the ground and at the walls of Konoha. The goal was to trigger any traps the wily Konoha shinobi may have placed. At the same time, Konoha responded with a barrage of kunai released from their accursed Fuinjutsu scrolls. They were anticipating that, and those with abilities in futon or doton blew kunai away or brought up earthen walls to protect their comrades. Since those abilities were rarer in Kumo, they didn't have full coverage. Those squads without a futon or doton expert relied on skilled jonin to protect their comrades by deflecting the kunai with their own blades. Even with all the preparations, some kunai still caused injuries and a few deaths with their massive barrage. It was time for the Raikage to act. He blitzed forward, encasing himself with Raiten armor, and rushed past his shinobi. Sien Fuyu trailed behind him at a slower pace. The Raikage slammed into the wall with every expectation of smashing right through it and creating an opening for his shinobi to pour through. Instead, when he slammed into the walls of Konoha, Sakura's dispersal seal activated and distributed the impact throughout the length of the wall. It groaned in protest, but not even a crack manifested. The Raikage stepped back from the unexpected failure to break through. Not one to be deterred, he jumped onto the wall and using his chakra he raced up it. Konoha was ready for the Kumo shinobi to attempt this and had placed a variety of other seals on the wall. The first seal was another storage seal that carried flammable oil that was manually triggered by the defenders. Oil sprayed out and covered the wall. While the Raikage raced up, so did other Kumo Chunin and Jonin. The Raikage reached the top of the wall first and brutally crashed into a large Akamaki, killing him instantly. The Kumo shinobi, still climbing the wall, watched in horror as Konoha lit the oil-covered wall on fire. Instantly the oil ignited and burned the climbing shinobi. A few made it past the fiery conflagration with burns, and they were met with more of the Akamaki clan in close quarters, knocking most of them back down to the ground. Those that didn't make it past were burned to death or hastily dropped down to get away from the heat. To add salt to the wound, the wall itself was not burning, just the oil. A second sealing array had been placed on the wall that made it flame retardant. Konoha wasn't done yet. Poisonous smoke bombs were launched and landed in the midst of the chaos below the Konoha walls. Some shinobi were retreating from the flames while others were still trying to charge up the wall, braving the fire and seeking to support their leader. In that chaotic mill of shinobi, the deadly gas rose up, adding to the confusion and laying several shinobi low before they could get away. But the Raikage was up on the wall and he blitzed through the defenders. The Aburame clan unleashed swarms of Kikaichu to try to drain his chakra. However, he simply moved too fast for them to even attempt to latch on. The Raikage quickly spotted Shibi Aburame and poured on the speed and used Rariato, Lariat, on the head of the Aburame clan. Shibi was skilled and had used one of his favorite tricks of planting explosive seals underneath the ground with his insect allies. He only had a fraction of a second to detonate them, and the explosion discharged right underneath the Raikage's feet. The explosion did little damage thanks to the Raiten no Yoroi, lightning release armor. It did, however, alter his charge slightly, and so instead of the lariat instantly killing Shibi, it only slammed into his shoulder, shattering the arm socket and fracturing the collarbone. An Akamaki used Bubenbiker no Jutsu, partial multi-size technique, to grow his arm and hand and try to flatten the Raikage. The leader of Kumo was far too swift. The attack was easily dodged and then the tables were turned. The Raikage initiated another lariat that pulped the Akamaki. Shibi was racked with pain but managed to create a Mushi Bunshin no Jutsu, insect clone. The insects carried sulfuric acid with them on the hollow inside of the clone. Shibi hoped that when the deadly S-class opponent struck down the clone, the acid would melt the armor. It was not to be. The Raikage did indeed smash the clone, but the acid was ineffective. 3 Hyuga branch members rushed him at once using their Juken, gentle fist, style of chakra closing attacks. In less than a second their corpses were thrown back and their bodies demolished. Shibi only had a fraction of a second to try to frantically think of some other stratagem to stop this seemingly unstoppable assault before the Raikage's fist crashed into his head and ended the life of the Aberrane clan head. Break. Onoki was ready for his long-awaited vengeance. The yellow flash had broken him during the Third Shinobi War and he would now at long last have his revenge. Iwa had been destined for greatness. They were winning the war. Their place in history was assured until Minato crippled them. The battle on the right flank was quite different than the one on the left. Onoki masked himself with Maegakure no Jutsu, hiding with camouflage technique, and flew high above the battlefield. Light would reflect around his body making him almost invisible to all but the most perceptive shinobi. This being an Iwa technique and him being in the air made it very unlikely that a Konoha shinobi would think to be on the lookout for something like that. But they would detect the massive surge of chakra as it built up. The first 2 seconds caused confusion and alarm and then after that it was too late. With great relish Onoki released a massive rectangular prism from his hands. A 40-foot section of the wall, all of the seals in that section and all of the Konoha defenders were encased in white light and then it all disappeared. He had used Jinten, Genkai Hakuri no Jutsu, Dust Release, Atomic Dismantling Jutsu, and it had instantly killed dozens of shinobi and created a huge gap in the Konoha defense that was swiftly exploited by the Kumo Nin he had allied himself with. Onoki wasn't done. While the chakra required to use the Kekkei Tota was immense, there was a reason that Onoki had risen to the rank of Kage. He had chakra to burn. The Leaf Shinobi knew he was there and Kunai and Kaiten Jutsu from the Sarutobi clan raced upward toward him. It took little effort to simply fly above the Kunai and avoid the Kaiten Jutsu. Soon the Konoha defenders had to focus on fighting the Kumo Shinobi and the Chushikage flew deeper into Konohagakure. Break. Jiraiya had been ready for the assault. Moments before he quizzically looked to the sky and asked, "Does Kumo have any shinobi that have learned how to fly?" His companions shook their heads. The Hokage stretched out his senjutsu senses and realized the chakra source was massive. Radio Onoki and Ibiki that Onoki is attacking to our left. Asuma's cigarette dropped from his mouth. They had to deal with the Raikage and the Chushikage. Speaking of the Raikage, he spotted him signal the charge and Kumo shinobi launched kunai with explosive tags at the gate, the walls and the ground. The attack triggered some of Konoha's traps but not all of them. Jiraiya gave the signal and Konoha retaliated by opening their kunai scrolls spraying death into the Kumo ranks. As was expected, Kumo took countermeasures. Kumo charged forward and attempted to climb the walls and the gate. As the Kumo Nin on Konoha's right flank had experienced, the wall was lit on fire and many were burned or were sent to their deaths. Oddly enough, the Raikage was hanging back and had yet to engage. Tsunade asked, "Should one of our teams go after Onoki?" The Toad Sage shook his head. "We've passed along the message to Onoki, we'll wait for him to relay Shikaku's tactical advice." The Kumo shinobi were wary of approaching the flaming wall and had settled into a mid-range duel of ninjutsu. Azure blasts of Raiten energy struck out at the defenders while Konoha retailed with kunai, Kaiten jutsu and poisonous gas. "Something isn't right," Hyashi advised. "The Raikage isn't doing anything and Kumo is being very cautious. It's almost as if the real attack isn't here." Jiraiya frowned as an unexpected Kaiten attack from the Kumo line killed a surprised Chunin on the wall. Hyashi was right. Something was off. To the left in the distance he could see the massive hole in the wall that Onoki's Jinten, dust release, had caused. As he was considering these implications, Onoki's voice filled his mind. Shikaku suggests Jiraiya take his team and secure the right flank. The Raikage has broken through there and is inflicting heavy casualties. Tsunade's team should head left and try to plug the gap. We'll move reserves to the central gate. We will deal with the Chushikage. Ibiki is taking control of the tactical situation. The Hokage replied, "Understood, be careful, the old man isn't a lightweight, he's got just as much chakra as the Raikage." The telepathic orders had gone to the team leads and Jiraiya signaled Genma, Yugao and Hyashi to follow him. "The Raikage out there is a clone, we need to deal with the real one." The four of them sprinted toward the right side of the village knowing that every second they delayed probably meant another Konoha shinobi dead at the hands of Kumogakure's leader. Break. Naruto and Sakura were making good time. They had no idea when the attack would take place other than that it would be before dusk. They were in Hai no Kuni and were nearing the village. It would be close but they would make it before dusk. An hour before they would reach the village, Sakura asked him to stop. What is it, Sakura-chan? We need to hurry. I know, but you should create some clones and have them wait here and gather the nature chakra you need for your senjutsu. Naruto blinked and rubbed the back of his head. Oh yeah, good idea. After he made 2 clones, he picked Sakura back up and they raced toward home. Break. Anko wasn't at 100% after her fight with Darui and gulping down more than one soldier pill, but she could still fight. The problem was that her orders were to collect the other shinobi returning to Konoha that had been on missions when news of the invasion arrived. And right now they had not encountered many returning shinobi. Hayes and his team of Chunin were the first to arrive. Anko wasn't impressed with Hayes. He was one of the Chunin that was planted in the first round of the Chunin exam testing. She didn't have anything against him personally, but he often volunteered for non-dangerous assignments, which meant she questioned his abilities. 2 more teams arrived. One was another squad of Chunin and then one Jonin and his 3 genin. Anko had been hoping for far more. To make matters worse, she was in sight of Konoha and could see smoke rising. Battle was joined and she was sitting on her hands while her comrades were fighting. Aruka saw her frustration and he said, "We'll move out soon. I'm pushing my senses out as far as they can go, but if I don't sense anyone in the next 30 minutes, we should move out with what we have." Anko gave a barely perceptible nod and continued staring out at Konoha. Break. The Hokage and his team arrived at the scene of a massacre. Hyuga, Akamaki and Aberrane corpses littered the ground. Without defenders, the Kumo shinobi had streamed over the wall and were pressing into the heart of Konoha. Jiraiya could sense the Raikage was near thanks to his enhanced senjutsu senses. In a flash, the Raikage had charged him, and only the combination of his heightened senses and S-class worthy reflexes allowed him time to put up his arms to block the lariat that threatened to take off his head. The Raikage was moving at full speed and with absolute power. The lariat crashed into Jiraiya's arms and bruised them heavily. The Toad Sage was knocked off his feet and smashed into a nearby building. Hyashi darted in with grace and speed. The enemy was within his field of divination. Of course, the battle was proceeding at lightning speed, and already 20 Juken, Gentle Fist, strikes had been launched in the time it would have taken to announce that his opponent was in his field of divination. Unfortunately for the clan head, his chakra-laced strikes could not pierce the lightning armor. It did drain chakra, and so Hyashi continued his assault. The Raikage was surprised at the Hyuga attack. The man hadn't been in the field for years but was listed as an A-ranked taijutsu specialist. The Raikage moved faster than the Hyuga and sent his fist careening toward Hyashi. Hyashi tilted his head to the side, causing the blow to miss, but the Raikage was too fast and nearly instantly arrested his fist's moment and sent it slamming sideways toward Hyashi's head. Hyashi had barely enough time to get his palm up, but against the Raikage's power it just slammed into his hand and only slightly slowed down the blow. Hyashi was also launched away from the Raikage, though the damage to his body was greater than to Jiraiya's. Jiraiya was naturally tougher and stronger before even taking into account the senjutsu chakra flowing through him. Yugao and Genma had followed instructions and engaged the other Kumo shinobi. Genma fired Senbon with speed and accuracy while Yugao sped forward using her Obarazukio, Moonlit Night. It was incredibly hard to counter because her speed created an afterimage that confused her opponents. She had sliced down a pair of Kumo Kenjutsu specialists in a matter of moments. The Raikage turned to deal with Genma and Yugao when the Godime Hokage came roaring back onto the battlefield. His arms were bruised, but his ability to fight had not been damaged. While he charged at the Raikage, Lord Fukasaku used Zesenzen, fighting tongue slash. Pa had used his own senjutsu abilities to strike out with his tongue infused with natural chakra. It slashed with a speed that no eyes but the Sharingan could follow and could cut through stone. The Raikage sensed the attack and showed why his speed was so feared. He dodged to the side and rushed in close. The earth of Konoha was sliced completely through by Pa's tongue. Jiraiya and the Raikage clashed with thunderous force. Their fists crashed into each other and the raw speed of the Raikage met with the raw power of Kawazu Kumite, Frog Kumite. The collision of the cage's fist shattered windows hundreds of yards away and completely blew back any shinobi who happened to be nearby. The Raikage felt a massive drain on his chakra as he was thrown back by the clash. Other than being rattled around a bit, his physical body had not taken harm thanks to his Reiten no Yoroi, lightning release armor. Jiraiya on the other hand had split his knuckles open from the force of the blow. But nonetheless he was the one standing while the Raikage had been the one blown backwards. This caused an instant feeling of shock to flow over the Kumo shinobi, which made him even easier prey to Genma and Yugao. Jiraiya didn't waste any time in capitalizing on this as well and let loose with Hari Jigoku, Needle Hell, into dozens of Kumo shinobi. His hair itself had become a weapon that slew with a speed even greater than Genma's Senbon. The Raikage, enraged by the death of his shinobi, stood up and roared. He was faster than Jiraiya, he just had to avoid getting hit and the battle would be his. He flashed across the battlefield. Shima, however, knew something like that would happen and had already inhaled and prepared Futon, Shinkugyoku, wind-release vacuum bullets. Even with his speed he couldn't close the distance before the wind-powered bullets rippled through the air. Since Futon Chakra was one of the few things that could breach his defense, he dodged away from the stream of deadly bullets, his speed certainly fast enough to do so. This gave time for the Hokage to form a massive Rasengan in his hand almost half the size of a human body. The Raikage darted past the Hokage, avoiding the spiraling ball of death. He then dashed back toward him. The Hokage was slower than he was, but his speed was still quite swift. Jiraiya spun on his heel and the ball slammed the Rasengan into the Raikage, sending him flying backwards. The Raikage felt the chakra drain away again but got to his feet ready for another assault. Then he remembered Daru's request. If he came across an opponent dangerous enough, he was to retreat back and strike elsewhere. Though it galled him to do so, he had told Darui that he trusted in his plan. With great disgust he retreated back from the Hokage and over the wall back toward his own lines. Jiraiya felt the Raikage leave and was surprised. As long as the man's chakra held up, the lightning armor could likely not be pierced by anything that wasn't filled with wind chakra. Many shinobi thought the Rasengan was a futon-derived jutsu, but that was not the case. With his senjutsu senses he knew the Raikage still had plenty of chakra to keep going despite getting struck twice by powerful attacks. Jiraiya took stock of the situation and expanded his senses. Roughly 120 Kumo shinobi had breached the wall and had gone past the wall area and deeper into the village. He hoped the Inuzuka and reserve forces could deal with them. He also knew that hundreds and hundreds of Kumo shinobi were now getting over the wall with impunity. Jiraiya quickly did two things. First, he summoned Gamabunta and requested he hold the line here. Secondly, he found Hyashi, who had a bruised shoulder, a broken finger and a severe concussion. If a medical nin could treat him, he could fight again soon. He carefully picked Hyashi up and quickly delivered him to one of the reserve squads that were headed to his location to help breach the gap. Take him to one of the triage locations and get him to the front of the line quickly. Infiltrators have made it into Konoha. Once he's up and fighting, have him work with the Inuzuka teams and hunt him down. High Hokage Sama. Break. Fuyu and her scouts had made it up the wall after the Raikage had decimated the defenders. Instead of staying and helping, they had pushed forward to wreak havoc behind the enemy lines. With them was C, who was annoyed to be away from the Raikage's side. Fuyu glared at him. Did he look like he needed help? Now be quiet. It didn't take long for them to sense an ambush, and sure enough, a pair of Inuzuka along with their ninken charged forward with Gatsuga, fang over fang. Fuyu slipped to the left of the attack and her blade slashed one of the ninken down. Its Inuzuka partner howled in fury and charged in, but a taijutsu specialist versus a kenjutsu specialist could only end in one way unless there were hidden abilities or the taijutsu specialist was far beyond the kenjutsu specialist's abilities. Neither was the case, and soon she had decapitated the fool. Fuyu had been tempted to blame C for them being spotted, but there were a pair of Hyuga with the ambush group. The damned eyes could see through the actual buildings they had been using for cover. As an infiltration specialist, what happened next amused her greatly. C used his Reigen Raikotsu, lightning illusion, flash pillar, to blind the two Hyuga, who were swiftly dealt with as they clutched their eyes. The other Inuzuka managed to kill one of her shinobi before being taken down. Good thing they underestimated us. Fuyu knew it wouldn't be that easy moving forward. No doubt right at that moment another Hyuga was watching them from thousands of feet away, relaying what had just happened. The next time they were attacked, it would be by a much more dangerous force. Break. Tenten had been only a few feet away from the Chushikage's attack. One moment she was standing next to a kind Sarutobi clan member, a distant cousin of Asuma, and the next the man was gone. Just gone. Tenten didn't have time to mourn as the Kumo shinobi streamed into her village. Some of the Sarutobi clan attempted to strike down Onoki, however she knew it was hopeless. Being a ranged specialist herself, she knew that ranged attacks fired into the air against someone like the Chushikage were futile. Their attention needed to be on the Kumo shinobi advancing in. Tenten flung a brace of kunai with explosive tags attached to them at the advancing horde. It didn't do nearly as much damage as she had hoped. These weren't genin or soldiers, these were chunin and jonin. The Kumo shinobi used shunshin to close with the Sarutobi clan before they could turn the deadly Kaiten jutsu on the enemy that wasn't in the sky. Tenten grew sick to her stomach seeing them cut down and knew she had to do something. Soshoryu Kaioke, Ultimate Twin Rising Dragons. 2 Fuinjutsu scrolls rose up in the air and disgorged every manner of weapon conceivable. Kunai, daggers, katanas, maces and senbon were just a few of the types of weapons. She had gone to Sakura to learn how to create larger ceiling scrolls. Really nothing had changed except the sheer quantity of weapons that were being sent out. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds rained down on the Kumo shinobi. Kenjutsu met ranged weapons and in most cases the art of the blade countered the thrown attacks. However, 1 in 30 did cause damage, which meant dozens of shinobi were injured and a few were killed. And Tenten wasn't done. Every single one of those weapons had an explosive tag attached to them and Tenten detonated them all. Even weapons that had been successfully deflected now exploded and delivered death. Some of the metal Tenten had used was high quality, but roughly half had been junk metal that now shattered under the explosion, sending shrapnel in every direction. She had inflicted horrific damage, far beyond what one would think that a chunin would be capable of. But while the casualties were massive, there were plenty more Kumo shinobi charging in. The weapons specialists knew that Kumo had the numerical advantage unless they threw civilians, genin and non-combat shinobi at them. The next several minutes passed in a blur as she went weapon to weapon against the Kumo shinobi. She took a kick to the head and a cut to her leg, but she was still fighting when she met her match. Tenten was currently armed with a sword and her opponent had to be jonin level. She backed up as his blade sought her head, barely defending against every attack. Her blade was a fraction of a second too slow against one follow-through, and instead of cleanly parrying the blow, she didn't get to it in time and the blade chopped into her side. It wasn't a fatal wound, but it was bleeding badly, and now it was only a matter of time. The Kumo jonin launched another offensive and Tenten could barely follow the blade. Feinting twice, he came on and Tenten was too focused on his blade and never saw his foot rise up and knock her own blade out of her hand and then double her over with a vicious kick to the stomach. Tenten didn't have time to dodge as the blade swung down to end her life. This is it. But instead of death, Tenten felt a forceful wind hit her in the face. When she looked up, the Kumo shinobi was prone on the ground 30 feet away at an unnatural angle. A blinding grin that showed off her sensei's sparkling teeth was a sight she never would have thought she would be this thankful for. He gave her the thumbs up and then slammed into another Kumo shinobi. Trailing after him was Tsunade-sama, Asuma and Neji. Neji paused and said, "Tsunade-sama, she needs help." Asuma, seeing so many of his clan dead or injured, charged after Guy with a furious expression on his face. Tsunade bent down next to Tenten and quickly sealed the wound. "Take a plasma pill and give yourself a few minutes. After that you'll be well enough to fight." That was all Tsunade said before rushing after her team and rolling over the attacking Kumo shinobi, taking them down like wheat before a scythe. Tenten was in awe at the sheer destructive power of Tsunade, Guy, Asuma and Neji. She had always respected Neji's power, but since joining the Rapid Response Squad his skill had increased tremendously. And Tsunade, it was an honor to see her fight. Her chakra-infused punches shattered blades and bodies alike. She rose to her feet and jumped back into the fray. Break. Onoki had collapsed the wall for the invading Kumo forces, but he wasn't done wreaking havoc. He could have remained with the Kumo shinobi and helped them slaughter the defenders, but his Jinten, dust release, would then be in danger of hitting his allies. The Raikage wasn't a forgiving man, and so he decided to take out other targets of opportunity within Konoha. The first target was Konoha's hospital. It would likely be staffed with medical nin and used as a place to care for the wounded. By destroying it he would do significant damage and hurt morale. Knowing that you had skilled medical assistants on hand gave courage to shinobi. He was going to take that away. Onoki flew closer. He could turn the entire multi-story building into dust, but that would tax his chakra considerably. Instead he chose to fly closer and strike at the ground floor. This would cause the entire structure to come crashing down. As he descended he was spotted by a Hyuga who put everyone on alert. Not that it mattered. It was an easy enough matter to dodge a few kunai and then launch another Jinten, Genkai Hakuri no Jutsu, dust release, atomic dismantling jutsu. His jutsu struck the first floor and turned it into dust, killing patients, doctors and medical nin. The rest of the patients in the building also died as the hospital crashed to the ground. Some of the shinobi and medical nin did survive by leaping out of the windows or using their chakra in some way to push away debris. One such shinobi was Shizune, whose face was a mask of rage. "This is unforgivable," she said in a voice reminiscent of her shushu. Onoki knew he should move on to his next target, but he couldn't help but taunt his hated enemy. "No, stupid girl, what was unforgivable was the yellow flash murdering my people." He still had his camouflage jutsu up, but his voice allowed Shizune to know instantly where he was. He was about 20 feet off of the ground and Shizune dashed forward, spitting poison senbon as she grew closer. The senbon were tiny slivers of death. He figured they were poisoned, and so instead of taking chances, the Chushikage used futon, repusho, wind release, gale palm, to scatter them away. He decided not to try to pin down the agile-looking Kunoiki with another sample of Jinten, dust release. It was wasteful on his chakra reserves and it could be hard to hit a moving target. The jutsu had the appearance of being nearly instantaneous, but it actually took a couple of seconds of chakra build-up to function. The instantaneous belief came from no one ever seeing someone caught in it ever escaping. By the time an enemy saw the jutsu, it was too late. So instead he used Doten, Goremu no Jutsu, Earth Release, Earth Golem technique, to create a golem from the ground near Shizune. Its massive hand attempted to grab the medical nin, but she dodged away from it. Onoki laughed and created another. Shizune kicked out at one of them using chakra to make the blow more powerful, but it only slightly cracked the golem. She used Kawarimi to get clear and fired more poisoned senbon at the flying cage. Annoyed at her persistence and unwilling to give her the satisfaction of having said that she forced back the cage of a Wagakur, he used futon, repusho, wind release, gale palm, again, and then followed it up with an immediate futon, daytopper, wind release. Great breakthrough. He had been through many wars and battles, and his ability to manipulate any of the elements he had an affinity with was legendary. Shizune was not expecting the powerful gust of wind so soon after one jutsu had ended. She was pressed flat against the earth and could do nothing as the earth golem hand slammed into her. It crushed bone and she barely hung on to consciousness. It grabbed her and held her in the air, squeezing her and preventing any movement. Onoki hovered near her. "Just so that you know, child, my next target is your village's pathetic civilian shelters." With those final words, the golem's fist closed and Shizune died. Before the revenge-maddened Onoki could continue, the hunters had come for him. Perhaps if he had left immediately after demolishing the hospital, he would have been able to strike the civilian shelters down with his Jinten, dust release. But now, because he had been delayed, the Inoshika Cho team had arrived. And they had a plan. Break. Darui had handed out short-wave radios to shinobi whose only purpose was to observe the battle and report back. Darui examined the data on how the battle was going. Already things weren't going exactly as planned. Onoki had done his part initially, but instead of waiting for new orders, he had gone off into the heart of Konoha to deal damage. While it could end up working out for the best, the uncertainty was frustrating. The traps Konoha had set on the walls had delivered higher than expected results. It didn't do much to change the numerical advantage, but it was regretful. Darui was thankful when the Raikage had followed the plan and had retreated away from the Hokage. And speaking of the devil, Darui looked up and there he was. "I have never run from a fight, Darui." Darui never changed his expression. "I am sorry. It was necessary. I'd like you to hit the central gate." Tsunade was seen heading toward the gap Onoki made, and Jiraiya hasn't moved from your assault area. The Raikage grunted and was about to speed off when Darui added, "Lord Raikage, when you engage, it's likely the Hokage will arrive again. As soon as he does, retreat and then attack the breach Onoki created. I'm going after that toad summon." The Raikage nodded and sped back into battle. Darui had already killed one summon and Manda had a more fearsome reputation. Once the Great Toad was down and the best of Konoha's defenders were on the other side of the village, there would be no meaningful resistance on that side. Over 1,000 Kumo shinobi would pile in and the advantage of numbers would start to play more heavily in their favor. He turned to his aides. "You know the orders and contingency plans laid out. Do your duty and we will win." The Hokage along with his Toad Sage allies, as well as Genma and Yugao had rushed to the central gates that had finally been burst open with the return of the Raikage to the fight. The Raikage was a nearly unstoppable force of nature and he once again littered the battlefield with the dead. By the time Jiraiya got there, the Raikage had butchered the defenders and the Kumo shinobi were pressing into the village. His blood up and the sight of the dead caused him to unleash a devastating wide-area attack. Kaiten Dai Enden, fire release, big flame bullet, roared the Hokage. Pa and Ma added to the conflagration with a paired futon, Daytopper, wind release, great breakthrough. The roaring flames ignited several unfortunate Kumo shinobi. The Raikage snarled at seeing his proud shinobi wiped out so swiftly. Murderer, you claim to desire peace but ignite war. Jiraiya looked bewildered. Me? Are you insane? You and Iwa started this war. Lies. The Raikage blazed forward attempting to take off the Hokage's head. Jiraiya lacked the absolute speed of the Raikage but he wasn't so far outclassed that he couldn't dodge the obvious attack. He ducked the blow but the Raikage had stopped his momentum on a dime and then jabbed back with a vicious elbow that smashed into the Hokage's back violently throwing him forward. Jiraiya's back gave a spasm of pain. It felt like his entire spine was bruised. The Raikage was not done and turned to finish off the older Kage. The Hokage wasn't going to make it easy and swiftly used his fastest technique. Senpo, Kebari Senbon, Sage Art, Hair Needle Senbon. Jiraiya's long white hair grew thick with Senjutsu chakra and became hard as steel. In an instant the spikes were launched at the charging Raikage. The Raikage was hit by dozens of the steel-hardened, nature chakra-infused spikes. His lightning armor leaked chakra like a sieve but his pace was only slightly slowed. The Raikage slammed his fist into Jiraiya's head that had been slightly bowed in order to more easily fire the hair spikes. Jiraiya crashed into the ground painfully. The Raikage's leg fired like a piston slamming into the Hokage's ribs and launching him into the air. The Raikage pushed off of the ground with chakra and jumped into the air to strike down the leader of the Leaf Village. His strike was blocked by the sudden appearance of Gama, one of the stout battle toads of Mount Myoboku. While he was not a massive toad he did carry Jonin levels of strength and hardiness. Shima had summoned the toad without hand seals. The Raikage being the Raikage meant that even Gama's mighty strength was unequal to the task and the toad's arm shattered under the blow. However, the collision did pause the Raikage's momentum which gave Jiraiya the breathing room he needed to Kawarimi a safe distance away. He had cracked ribs and a nasty knot on his forehead. If it hadn't been for Sage Mode his skull would have likely been shattered. Gama dissipated in a puff of smoke back to Mount Myoboku. While in mid-air the Raikage's speed did him little good. With nothing to shove off of he could not change the laws of gravity with chakra the way Onoki could. He saw two Senbon flash wide of him. The Senbon had ultra-thin ninja wire attached that had lines of explosives tags on them. As the wires came together behind the Raikage the tags went off. Inside his Raiten no Yoroi, lightning release armor, he took no damage but more chakra was burned off. Genma had to be content with that because there was little else in his arsenal that could make an impact. The Raikage landed and launched himself back at the Hokage who was ready for him. Raising and whirling in both hands he thrust them at speeding Raiten specialist. The Raikage dodged one and blocked the other which he had hoped would give him an opening to drive his fist into Jiraiya. The whirling mass of chakra couldn't pierce his aura of lightning but the swirling rotation did put out enough force to throw him back. The instant he was thrown back Pa and Ma both let loose a blistering barrage of air bullets via futon, shinkugyoku, wind release vacuum bullets. A shinobi in free fall cannot arrest his momentum so he had little choice but to throw up his arms in a defensive posture as the two toad sages peppered him with the air bullets. The bullets tore into his Raiten no Yoroi, lightning release armor, and pierced into his flesh. The energy had partially dissipated going through the lightning barrier but it still had enough cutting power to pierce a couple of inches into his muscular arms. Biting back the pain the Raikage heeded Daru's early request and fled back out of Konoha. Jiraiya lacked the speed to pursue. It was one thing to counterattack where he knew an enemy would be since they were on the offensive. It was another to chase after someone who was simply faster. Jiraiya had no time to nurse his cracked ribs, the contusion on his head or his bruised back as the Kumo shinobi charged in. Despite the fiery death he laid out and their cage seemingly rooted they did the duty and charged fearlessly at the Hokage. Doton, Yomi Numa, Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld, was quickly placed at the gate's entrance slowing the entry of more enemy shinobi. Those who were caught in the swamp slowly began to sink as the chakra-infused mud prevented their escape through things like the body substitution technique. There was no rest for the Hokage as Kumo shinobi already threw, and those climbing over the walls assailed him with kunai, senbon and kenjutsu. Some that attacked were Raiten clones that carried dangerous levels of voltage. Even a pair of genjutsu users attempted to snare the Sannin several times despite not being able to fool the Toad Sage's enhanced senses. Jiraiya responded with devastating combination jutsus with his Toad Sage allies. The enemy was rarely able to cause damage, but a few did. A senbon nicked Shima, though fortunately it was not poisonous. A particularly skilled kenjutsu specialist managed to give the Hokage a shallow cut on his shoulder, and finally a kaiten jutsu from long range singed him. The fire jutsu was one Jiraiya hadn't seen before and actually seemed to follow the intended target. Corpses piled up around him and his guards took on a support role, doing their best to make sure the Hokage was not flanked. A normal sage would have long run out of natural chakra, but Jiraiya had Pa and Ma who alternated staying perfectly still and gathered nature chakra for Jiraiya. However, the battle with the Raikage and the non-stop fighting with the Kumo shinobi was taxing them greatly. They simply could not keep up with the expenditure of natural chakra. Jiraiya could sense this but still fought on against the extremely skilled horde of shinobi. Break. Even as Shizune breathed her last, the Konoha Logistical Corps was frantically making backup plans to beef up the ad hoc trauma centers near the front lines for wounded shinobi. Those areas had supplies, but more supplies were going to be needed now that the primary aid location was decimated. Every skilled shinobi was needed to fight, so it was up to the genin to take fuinjutsu sealed scrolls filled with bandages, plasma pills, soldier pills, sutures and other medical supplies to the waiting triage stations. Konohamaru, Udon and Mogi were one such team that was frantically carrying a set of scrolls to one of the triage centers. In their haste they nearly ran into the middle of a battle involving several Hyuga and other Chunin against Fuyu, C and a band of infiltrators. Shit, this way, Konohamaru called out and bolted down a side alley. A Kumo shinobi with a katana leapt down from one of the roofs, cutting off their escape. The man darted forward at Chunin level speed and Konohamaru got into a fighting stance while throwing a pair of shuriken. The Chunin easily deflected the shuriken, but he had slowed his forward movement slightly, which allowed Mogi time to open up a kunai scroll. 40 kunai burst forth at almost point-blank range. The surprised Chunin contorted his body and deflected as best he could, but one slammed into his leg, another slashed his cheek and the final one hit his side and deflected off of his rib. The shinobi's charge turned into a tumble and Konohamaru took a risk and kicked the man's hand, breaking his grip on the katana. Udon used a weak genjutsu that was ineffective while Konohamaru sent another kick at the Chunin. He caught Hiruzen's grandson's leg and slammed the boy against the wall of the alley painfully. Mogi attached an explosive seal to her kunai and launched it at the nin's feet. The wounded shinobi pushed off with his good leg and pulled the kunai free of his leg. He threw it at the young kunoiki who brought up her own kunai to deflect it. Chilling laughter could be heard at the opposite end of the alley in the direction of the fighting. Fuyu appeared with her blades dripping in blood. Having trouble with 3 genin. What a joke. Konohamaru shakily got to his feet. The woman moved with a deadly grace. Boy, I have no interest in killing children. I'll let you live if you know where Anko Mitarashi is. Konohamaru had no idea where she was, but even if he did, he wouldn't tell the enemy anything. Screw you. My name is Konohamaru Sarutobi and I'll never betray my village. Break. Shikaku arrived near the hospital and saw Onoki start rising back into the air. The Nara couldn't believe their luck at finding him near the ground and immediately used a shunshin to close the distance and use Kijimain no Jutsu, shadow imitation technique. Onoki had felt the chakra and prepared to defend himself. He only had an instant to see the shadows lash out after his own shadow. At that the last moment before the shadows touched, he used a kawarimi with a piece of debris. The Chushikage was now on the ground. Shikaku sent his shadow racing back toward the cage. The Chushikage knew flying into the air wouldn't stop the attack since he would still be casting a shadow on the ground. The Nara ability worked by shadows touching shadows. Instead he recreated earth golems and sent them charging after the Nara. He then used kawarimi again to get away from the streaking shadow. Meanwhile the rest of the team arrived. Onoki opened up with a kunai scroll while Ebisu used kaiten, Gokaku no Jutsu, fire release, great fireball technique. Since he wasn't able to use futon jutsu due to the flames, Onoki used a simple mud wall to block the kunai and the fiery jutsu. Onoki meanwhile used Magen, Niju Kokoni Arazu no Jutsu, demonic illusion, double false surrounding technique. Onoki easily dispelled the genjutsu but only the first layer. The second layer however was not dispelled and Onoki did not detect it because it changed almost nothing about his surroundings. The only change was that it masked the approach of a second Kijimane being used by the real Shikaku. The earth golem smashed down at the Nara shadow clone that dodged away from the attack. Choza barreled into the scene and smashed straight through one golem. He was using Nikuden Sensha, human bullet tank. He spun ominously and then headed straight for the diminutive cage. The attack was not one he expected to connect with. It was meant to deceive. It was just a further distraction so that the Kijimane could make contact. As the Chushikage turned to face Choza, the Kijimane touched his shadow and he froze in place. As soon as that took place, Ebisu used a shunshin to appear next to the Chushikage and drove a kunai into his throat. Their victory turned to surprise as the Chushikage transformed into a broken pile of rocks. Shikaku instantly knew that the old man had used Iwa Bunshin no Jutsu, rock clone technique, and played them for fools. But when did it happen? Thinking back on the battle, the only time where it could have happened was when he made the Doten, Doruheiki, Earth Release, Mud Wall. At the same time as he created it, he must have created the rock clone in the wall itself and then changed places with the clone. The wall exploded outward as an incredibly large and fast Doten, Dosekiru, Earth Style, Earth Dragon, slammed into Ebisu. The dragon pushed the scarred shinobi into a building. The attack snapped a number of bones and Ebisu collapsed unconscious after the jutsu ended. Did you think it would be that easy to defeat a cage? Onoki taunted them. Shikaku knew that what stood before him was no the actual Chushikage but another rock clone. Shikaku also knew that Onoki would be using his clan abilities to verify his actual location. It would be important for no one to reveal the fact that they knew the clone in front of them was not actually Onoki. I better keep him talking. Maybe I can draw him out. Troublesome. As someone who coordinated the defense of the village, I am ashamed to admit I never considered your presence. The rock clone chuckled. That was the point. Any last words before I finish you off and then lay waste to your precious shelters? Shikaku smiled. Just this. Even if you win here, Team 7 will hunt you down. After all, they were able to kill your son easily enough. It's unclear if your granddaughter survived the little attack on Takagakure, but with the massive amount of casualties inflicted, I wouldn't hold my breath. The real Chushikage gave a cry of pure rage underneath the earth, and then everything happened at once. Break. Anko, Iruka, the Anbu and the small group of stragglers were about to start racing back to the village that now had more parts burning. Before they did, Iruka raised his hand. A powerful chakra source is coming from the opposite direction. It will be here in about an hour. He paused, straining his senses, and then his eyes widened. No, it's moving fast, incredibly fast. It will be here in less than 30 minutes. Anko's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. Her mind almost immediately went to a worst-case scenario situation. Could one of the Jinchuriki from Kumo be trying to hit the village from an unexpected angle? Are there any other chakra signatures? Does it have any demonic chakra? Iruka furrowed his brow. Well, Anko pressed. Iruka's eyes popped open and then a smile blossomed on his face. It's Naruto Namikaze. Break. Pillars of strength held back the Kumo tide where the Chushikage had broken through the wall that surrounded Konohagakure. Maito Gai moved with relentless energy and never slowed down. His stamina reserves were astounding to all. Tsunade Senju was the second pillar of strength. Her chakra-filled punches seemed to go on without end. Asuma, Neji, Tenten and the few other surviving shinobi were truly in awe at what they were seeing. The initial moments of their team entering the battle was an uncontested slaughter. But as the battle grew longer, Asuma and Neji grew wearier. They could still fight at a high Jonin level, but they were slowing down. The problem was that it wasn't trash that they were fighting. They had to use chakra to move and defend against deadly Raiten strikes. These were elite shinobi who had trained for years for this war. They were holding, but only due to the prowess of Tsunade and Gai. Both Asuma and Neji downed their soldier pills and used their renewed energy to fight back the fatigue that threatened to leave them dangerously open. Tenten could only hope that the two S-class taijutsu specialists could keep going, because if they faltered, Kumo had an open path to the heart of Konoha. Break. The Raikage made it back to where Darui had set up camp. His right arm was not there as he had gone to deal with the Toad Chief. His aides however briefed him on the situation and a medical nin quickly healed the Raikage's pockmarked arms. He had knocked the Hokage around a bit but hadn't been able to deliver a decisive blow. The Hokage on his own wasn't his match but the two puppets on his shoulders were constantly thwarting his attempts to end the fight. And they had actually drawn blood, something that hadn't happened in years. The leader of Kumo realized he needed to change his strategy. The next attack he made on the Hokage would not be to the man himself but on those damn frogs. With that thought he continued to play it out as Darui envisioned. He raced over to the right flank where Onoki had opened the breach. For some reason his shinobi had not yet been able to fully break through and invade the village. Break. Konohamaru saw the writing on the wall. This was where he would die. The Kunoiki was a jonin and simply outclassed him and his teammates. But he would face death on his feet. Readying his kunai he faced his death like a Sarutobi. Run Konohamaru. The voice that shouted the order was from Kotetsu Hagen. His partner Izumo used Suten, Mizuame Nabara, water release, syrup trap, to flood the ally in between Konohamaru and Fuyu. Fuyu jumped back away from the sticky liquid and Kotetsu attacked her with both of his blades. Fuyu was slightly off balance from her unexpected leap but she was faster than Kotetsu. Within just a moment or two it became clear who the jonin was and who was the chunin. Meanwhile Konohamaru and his team charged the Kumo nin barring their path. Konohamaru was a talented genin and as he ran he used a surprisingly advanced technique. He palmed a pair of shuriken and used shuriken cage bunshin no jutsu, shuriken shadow clone technique. The Kumo chunin cursed and threw himself flat on the ground allowing the scores of deadly projectiles to sail over him. The three genin leapt over him and fled the alley. The Kumo nin gripped his blade and slashed at the last genin in the line. Udon was the last in line and so it was his leg that was sliced up by the katana. Udon stumbled and fell clutching his leg as his two teammates looked back in horror. Fuyu's blades danced like they were alive and Kotetsu was being driven back quickly. However each time she thought she finally had him his partner would interfere somehow. A thrown kunai, a small water jutsu or even a minor genjutsu that distracted her. Their teamwork was superb. They were momentarily distracted when Konohamaru yelled, "Udon no." The boy ran back for his friend and Izumo shouted for him to get away. But he wasn't going to leave his friend. Udon bled freely from his leg and the enemy nin rose up to cut him down. Konohamaru screamed and barely managed to parry the blow with his own kunai. Izumo left his friend to deal with Fuyu while he saved the beloved Sandaim's grandson. Fuyu grinned and lunged forward. Without any distraction the difference in skill was too great and in a moment Kotetsu had a blade in his gut. Fuyu ripped it out viciously and then finished him off with a slash through the throat. Izumo kicked the katana out of the wounded Kumo chunin's hand and slammed him against the ally wall. "Get out of here now," he barked out. Mogi and Konohamaru helped the nearly unconscious Udon stagger out of the ally and they took off at a hobbled run. Izumo managed to deliver a knife hand strike to the Kumo nin whose throat collapsed under the blow. He barely had time to turn before Fuyu was on him. He desperately tried to pull out a kunai and deflect one of Fuyu's descending blades but she compensated and cut off his hand. A quick double thrust to the chest finished off the affable pair of gate guards that knew everyone in the village. Their friendly faces would no longer greet returning shinobi and visitors alike. Break. C was not having a great day. He had been separated from Fuyu after a major counterattack by the Konoha reserves running into them. In the swirling melee they had broken off into smaller fights. Right now he was with a half-dozen fellow Kumo shinobi attempting to get back to their own lines. As a sensor he was able to avoid the trapped regions of Konoha but that funneled him right into places where Konoha shinobi lurked. He sensed a strong chakra source followed by several smaller ones heading for him. He motioned for his squad to change directions but their pursuers followed. Damn Hyuga. C decided being chased down and running the risk of running into more enemies wasn't a good idea. He told his squad to get ready and then the enemy appeared. C instantly recognized Hyashi Hyuga. The clan head killed the comrade next to him. He immediately used Reigen Raikage, lightning illusion, flash pillar. Unlike the previous attempt it failed to do anything to slow down Hyashi. C watched as the rest of the shinobi with him fought an Inuzuka and a two shinobi who didn't have obvious clan markings. Do you think I don't know the abilities of every single Kumogaku shinobi of any note? Hyashi asked in a deathly quiet voice. The guard of the Raikage took a step back and then created chakra scalpels in his hands. See, Jonin level, initially trained as a medical nin. Branched out into genjutsu and is reasonably skilled in taijutsu. Hyashi glided forward, the epitome of Hyuga grace. C lashed out with one chakra scalpel that Hyashi easily dodged and counterattacked with an instantaneous strike to a tenketsu point on his arm. The Kumo shinobi's chakra scalpel wavered as the flow of chakra became irregular in his arm. C used his other arm to strike, but again Hyashi easily avoided the blow and another tenketsu point was closed. C backpedaled, but Hyashi kept the distance close, easily keeping up. He attempted to use Kawarimi, but Hyashi was too close and interrupted the jutsu with a deadly strike to the chest that bruised his heart badly. The Kumo Jonin lashed out with his legs, but that too was futile. The Hyuga pressed in close and soon a barrage of gentle yet painful strikes ripped into C's chest. After the first 20 the man was dead, but Hyashi didn't stop until the last 44 strikes were complete. The Konoha shinobi finished off the small squad here while Hyashi used his Byakugan and scanned the area for the next targets. Break. Darui approached the battlefield where the Raikage had first struck. The Konoha shinobi had taken back the wall with the help of the Toad Chief Gamabunta. The stubborn defenders were using a wide array of jutsu and projectiles. With Gamabunta able to actually strike the top of the wall with his oversized knife, it prevented any progress even when his shinobi pushed through the Konoha defenders. Darui looked at the situation for a few moments and then sprinted up the wall. He dodged a Kaiten jutsu and then he was on top of the wall. His katana was out and his S-class reflexes and speed were good enough to easily dispose of the two Chunin. Gamabunta saw the action on the wall and lashed out with his blade. Darui flattened himself dodging the blade and then leaped at Gamabunta with a war cry. In midair he used Kawarimi to substitute himself with a discarded katana at Gamabunta's feet. Darui viciously slashed with his blade, cutting deep into the Great Toad's lower leg. The Great Toad gave a grunt of pain and kicked out with more speed than Darui had been expecting. Luckily for him he managed to dodge aside at that last moment so that the powerful kick only grazed his shoulder. The attack still spun him around, but he quickly recovered. A pair of kunai with explosive tags flew toward him, forcing him to dodge back. Gamabunta favored one leg and brought his knife down on Darui. Darui dodged the massive attack and unleashed Ranten, Riza Sakusu, Storm Release, Laser Circus. The thunderous energy smashed into Gamabunta, who was already unbalanced from his leg wound. The Great Toad teetered ungainly and fell flat on his back. A genjutsu tried to obscure Daru's senses, but he quickly dispelled it without any real effort as he raced toward the downed toad. Gamabunta lifted his head and fired a Suiten, Teppadama, water release, gunshot, at the charging Kumo nin. Unlike a normal Suiten jutsu, this attack was massive. It was 15 feet across and hurtling straight for him. With his forward momentum he couldn't dodge right or left to avoid it, so he jumped over it. Gamabunta slashed with Tanto at the descending storm release user. Darui snapped his blade down hard to intercept the larger weapon. Darui knew he had no chance of knocking the blade aside, but it allowed him to somewhat blunt its power. The two blades clashed and Darui avoided getting cut, however he was sent flying backwards and slammed into Konoha's outer wall painfully. Gamabunta struggled to his feet while Darui recovered from the hit. Changing tactics, Darui created several lightning clones and sent them at Gamabunta's vulnerable legs. Meanwhile he performed another Kawarimi and began cutting down Konoha shinobi, trying to stop the Kumo shinobi from cresting the wall. His opponents weren't incompetent, but they were all Chunin. His blade carved through the defenses like a hot knife through butter. Gamabunta seethed in frustration. He couldn't really let loose with mighty leaps and flatten the area and hopefully get the slippery Raiten user, because he would damage the defensive structures as well as kill his allies. Another Raiten clone bit into his leg, another one he squashed, but it discharged electricity that was frying his nerves. With a mighty roar, Gamabunta came up with a solution to the situation. He flexed his legs and then gave a mighty leap over the Konoha wall and into the gathered Kumo shinobi waiting for their chance. A few kunai and an azure bolt of lightning struck him in mid-air, but the damage was minimal. In return he killed several shinobi with the landing, and more were pushed back by the concussive shock waves. The gathered Kumo shinobi let fly with kunai, shuriken and explosive seals. Bolts of lightning assailed the Great Toad from all sides. Darui looked out and tilted his head and decided he could do more good slaughtering the defenders on this side of the wall. Gamabunta roared with the pain of hundreds of minor wounds. He took to the sky again and landed in a particular thick grouping of Kumo shinobi. Dozens of Kumo shinobi lost their lives. Another massive blast of water from his mouth sent more Kumo shinobi flying away. Darui began slaughtering the gathered Konoha shinobi. He wasn't as adept as the Raikage, but he was an S-ranked shinobi for a reason. The difference between a Jonin and a Chunin was large, but the difference between an average Jonin and an S-ranked threat was even greater. And right now all Darui had to contend with was Chunin. Gamabunta, however, was not so fortunate. He had to deal with Chunin and Jonin. While he was doing a fair job of massacring the Chunin, the Jonin were a harder nut to crack. His leaps allowed him time to vacate the area with a variety of techniques. He had created a sizable dent in the invading Kumo shinobi on this side, but blood loss and fried nerves were catching up to him. Sorry Jiraiya, but I can't go on. With an explosive pop, the exhausted and bloodied Gamabunta ended the summon and returned to Mount Myoboku. The gathered Kumo shinobi cheered and poured into Konohamaru by the hundreds. Break. Naruto and Sakura were intercepted by Anko and Iruka. Naruto put Sakura down and immediately asked, "What's going on? Why aren't you over there?" as he pointed toward Konoha. Anko gave him a thin smile. "Nice to see you too. Orders from the Hokage. We were tasked with gathering any stragglers coming back to Konoha. Are you ready to fight? Because from what I can tell from out here, the fighting is all over Konoha." Naruto grimaced. He had been privy to the defensive plans set up in case of this kind of invasion. He had after all created most of the seals. While Sakura had been the brain behind them, it had been his clones that had allowed them to be mass-produced. If they got past the walls, it meant that the enemy was strong. "I'm ready. I had to use the Kyuubi's chakra to get here, but I have more than enough energy left." Sakura also nodded, indicating her readiness. Anko quickly made a plan. Naruto would make clones and spread them out in all directions. He would pop them and determine the conditions in the village. Meanwhile, they would advance at a quick pace but not at top speed. They would then hit the part of the battlefield in most need of help. Before they moved out, Sakura gave Iruka and Anko each a kunai. Put a little chakra in them and in 2 seconds the Fuinjutsu seal will release. The seal is etched in the kunai. Anko, yours will create a highly corrosive gas that can melt flesh. The pressure seals will make it expand to a radius of 15 feet. She turned to Iruka. "Yours is a modified kunai scroll that when released will send out 40 kunai, and all of those kunai are replicas of the original." Iruka's eyes widened. "That's 1600 kunai." Sakura just smiled. Iruka hadn't seen the battle against the Iwa army. Naruto, though, had a grim expression on his face as he created 100 clones and had them fan out. They had invaded his country and attacked his home. Naruto was going to kick them the hell out, believe it. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.